Genetics is really governed by the rules of chance. So we can talk about Punnett squares all day, and we can say that based on the genotypes, we have a 1 in 4 chance of producing a homozygous recessive. But keep in mind that each birth event is actually its own chance event. So even though there's a 3/4 chance of an individual from 2 homozygous parents having a dominant phenotype, there's still that 1/4. And so it's possible that you might have 3 children all with the recessive phenotype. It's unlikely, but it's possible. And that's because genetics is basically a game of chance. Now, there are sometimes events that cannot occur. If you have 2 parents who are both homozygous dominant, you are not going to get a homozygous recessive child except by the very unlikely event of a mutation. So because of that, we can predict what might happen in a genetic cross. But in general, we can think of the movement of alleles as though they are possibilities. So a possibility of 0 means that it cannot occur. A possibility of 1 means that it will occur. Everything in between is just the likelihood that it will happen. So if you think about it this way, let's say you flip a coin 10 times. Now, you know that there's a 50% chance that you'll get heads and a 50% chance that you'll get tails. And the more that you do, the more likely you're going to get that 50-50 ratio. But there's always a chance that if you flip it 10 times, you might get 7 heads. And so even though the overall probability is 50-50, sometimes that doesn't happen. When you work with probabilities, all of the occurrences must add up to 1. So the chance of flipping a heads is 50%. The chance of flipping tails is 50%. The combined chance is 1. So you can use that idea as a way to check your probability calculations. The only problem and the only thing I will say is that if you do that, you actually have to calculate all the probabilities. So it may not be helpful, but it is helpful to keep this in mind, because if you end up calculating a probability that is greater than 1, you know that that cannot actually happen. So let's talk about 2 rules of probability that we are going to use when we are looking at genetics problems. So the first is the product rule, and the product rule says that the probability of 2 independent events, that means that they don't affect the outcome of the other, will occur is the product of their individual probabilities. So independent events means that neither event affects the outcome of the other. So let's do an example. Let's say we have 2 dice and we are going to roll those dice. What is the probability of rolling a 1 and a 6? The probability of rolling a 1 is 1 in 6. The probability of rolling a 6 is 1 in 6. So we use the product rule, multiply those, so the probability of rolling a 1 and a 6 is 1 in 36. Now you can do this 2 ways. You can roll 2 dice at the same time, or you can roll 1 dice and then the other. I like to think of this as the and rule. And this is sort of a trick to help you figure out what rule you need to use. However, it is not 100% because sometimes questions are slightly misleading in the way that they are written. So you can't necessarily look at what the question is stating. You have to think about what the problem is asking. So the probability that I'll roll a 1 and the probability that I will roll a 6, we multiply them. So let's look at another example. What is the probability of having a daughter and then a son and then another daughter? Well, the probability of having a daughter the first time is 1/2. Then the next child, the probability of having a son is again 1/2. And then the probability of having a daughter after that is 1/2. So our overall probability of getting daughter, son, daughter is 1/8. We can help keep track of what is happening with our product rule by using a branch diagram. So this is really helpful if you're looking at a lot of complicated combinations. So let's say we want to determine the chance of flipping a penny heads, then a dime tails, and then a quarter tails. So the probability of flipping a penny on heads is 1/2. The probability of flipping a dime on tails is 1/2. And the probability of flipping a quarter on tails is 1/8. So is 1/2. We can multiply all three of those together because we are doing heads and tails and tails. So we multiply those all together, we get an outcome of 1/8. So the chance of getting heads, tails, tails is 1/8. So when you set up your branch diagram, you're basically going to assign each branch a probability. Now, if you'll look, if you were to add all of these possible combinations up, you'll get a total of 1. Remember that all of our probabilities have to equal 1. We can do this branch diagram using our previous problem with the daughter, son, daughter. So let's say for our first child, the probability, so we'll say child 1, the probability of having a daughter is 1/2. The probability of having a son is 1/2. Now our next branch, probability of having a son is 1/2. Of course, daughter is 1/2 also. And then the probability of having a daughter again. Daughter is 1/2. Son is 1/2. And of course, we can do this lower bracket as well. I'm not going to do it here because I'm running out of room. But if we want to figure out daughter, son, daughter, we just follow our branch points. So daughter, son, daughter. Multiply 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 is equal to 1/8. So this is helpful if you need to figure out multiple combinations, or within the same problem if you're figuring out different combinations. We can also use the product rule to help us with our dihybrid crosses. Now, most of you are probably more comfortable with the Punnett squares for the dihybrids, but they can become a little bit tedious. And sometimes it is helpful for students to look at those in a different way. So we can set up a branch diagram in the same way that we did on the previous page with our flipped coins or our daughter, son, daughter example by looking at the different crosses that we would be wanting to do. So let's say we have our dihybrid cross here. The chances we would start out with one of our crosses, just one of the traits. Say y, y, cross y, y. And from that, you know that 3/4 are green. So there's our first probability. Sorry, 3/4 are yellow, 1/4 is green. And then we can branch out from there. And if you look at our probabilities, you see that we verify that 9 to 3 to 3 to 1. So let's write this out. We'll do an example. We'll do a couple of examples. I would suggest that you practice these and your Punnett square diagrams. And you can do this by making up any combinations that you want of these dihybrid crosses. You don't even have to necessarily give them specific specific phenotypes. You can if that makes it easier, but you can practice these on your own, making your own problems. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to separate our alleles and look at them one at a time. We're going to determine the probabilities for each event, and then we are going to use the product rule to figure out our overall probabilities. So let's look at this branch diagram with our dihybrid. So again, this is the yellow and green, or round and wrinkled. So let's start with our YY cross YY. So if we write out this Punnett square, you guys probably recognize this one. We are going to get 3/4 yellow and 1/4 green. Now let's combine our probabilities of getting yellow with our probabilities of getting round and wrinkled. So I'm not going to write out that Punnett square again. It's going to be exactly the same as our yellow. So there's a 3/4 chance that you will get round, essentially a big R or a big R little r, and there's a 1/4 chance you will get wrinkled, which is the little r. Same thing down here on the bottom. There's a 3/4 chance that you will get round. With either genotype, and a 1/4 chance that you will get wrinkled with the homozygous recessive. So if we calculate these phenotypes, we just multiply them out. We get 9 out of 16 chance of yellow and round, 3 out of 16 chance of yellow and wrinkled, 3 out of 16 chance of green and round, and a 1/4 chance of green and wrinkled. And you can verify this with the Punnett square. Let's do another example. Let's look at this cross here. Let's say that big F means fan-shaped leaves. Little f means round leaves. Let's say that big S stands for short stem and little s stands for long stem. All right, so when you do these branch diagrams, you can figure out the overall probabilities, or you can figure out the probability of just one of the branches. So let's just figure out the overall probabilities for now. So let's start with our leaf shape. So this Punnett square is going to be big F, little f, and then little f. If you can see these already, you don't necessarily have to write out the Punnett square. That's totally up to you. So in this case, I'm going to erase it, but we are going to have half heterozygous and half homozygous. So half are going to be the heterozygous, which is the fan-shaped, and half are going to be the homozygous, which are the round-shaped leaves. Now the stem length, this is the double heterozygote, so we're going to have 3/4 short stem, 1/4 long stem. Same thing on the bottom, 3/4 are going to be short, and this can be either of the dominant genotypes, and 1/4 is going to be long with the homozygous recessive. So now let's say we want to determine the probability of having a fan-shaped plant with short stem. That is going to be 1/2 times 3/4, which is 3/8. And this is going to be fan and short. So we can continue to calculate these. The probability of a fan-shaped leaf with long stems is 1/8. And then the probability of round leaves with a short stem is 3/8. And then the probability of round with long stem is 1/8. So I could ask you to find all the probabilities, or I might just ask you to tell me what's the probability of having round and long. Some of that you might be able to do even shorthanded. If you just look at the individual crosses, you could say, oh, there's a half chance of being round and a quarter chance of being long, just based on the two Punnett squares. You can write out your branch diagram, or you can do the Punnett square. For the test, you may be asked to do one or the other, or you may be given a choice to complete it however you feel comfortable. So make sure that you know how to do both, just in case I specify. If I don't specify how to do it, then you can do it by any method you want, except for copying off the person next to you. So let's do one more complicated one. This is a Dihybrid cross, so 3 different traits. Trying to do a Punnett square here would be a huge pain in the butt. So the branch diagram is a little bit easier to keep track of. So let's figure out all the possible combinations. So let's start with A's. So this is big A, little a, cross, little a, little a. If you need to do the Punnett square, go ahead and pause and do that now. So there is a half chance of having the dominant A phenotype, and there is a half chance of having the homozygous recessive A phenotype. Now let's look at the B gene. For the B gene, we have 2 homozygous dominant. Okay, so for the B gene, there is a 4 out of 4 or a 100% chance that you are going to be big B, big B. There is a 0% chance of being anything else. Now, the reason that I write that out is just so you can see where all of the branches go. So on our lower branch, you can see that as well. All right, so now let's look at the C's. So C is going to be the heterozygous. So the chance of, I'm going to move this down a little bit, being big C phenotype is going to be 3/4, and being the homozygous recessive for little c is going to be 1/4. Same thing down here. Now, the reason that I'm not branching off of the bottom B branch is because we're going to use the product rule, and anytime you multiply by 0, your chance is 0. So there is a 0 chance of having the dominant A or the recessive A with a recessive B. It's not possible from this cross. So let's calculate out our possibilities. So the chance of being big A, big B, big C phenotype is going to be 1/2 times 1 times 3/4, which is going to be 3/8. The chance of being big A, big B, little c is 1/2 times 1 times 1/4, which is 1/8. Now, just a little note, the chance of being anything with little b is 0. So it doesn't matter what the other ones are, you can never get a little b genotype. The chances of being a homozygous A phenotype with a big B and a big C are going to be 1/2 times 1 times 3/4. So again, 3/8. And then your little a, big B, little c is also going to be 1/8. And then, of course, if you were actually given phenotypes, you'll need to write that write them in. But in this case, you weren't given any, so just noting that you are the dominant A is okay here. Now, you can also, again, do these individually. Just use the product rule directly with your branch diagram if that works for you. All right, so let's talk about our second rule, the sum rule. Now, this one is a little bit harder to comprehend, I think, or at least to figure out when to apply it. A lot of times you're just going to use the product rule. But the sum rule wants you, or you use it when you can have a particular event occur because of multiple outcomes. So if you can have multiple independent events give you the same result, you want to use the sum rule. So let's do this by way of example. So let's say that we want to figure out the probability of using 2 dice to roll a 7. Now, if you think about dice, there are multiple ways that you can roll a 7. You can roll 4 and 3, or 3 and 4. So there's 2 ways that you can roll 7. You can roll 2 and 5, or 5 and 2. And then you can roll 1 and 6, or 6 and 1. Now this depends on which dice you're using, what number appears on each of those dice. So the probability of rolling let's look at the first one, a 4 is 1/6. The probability of rolling a 3 is 1/6. So here we are first going to use the product rule. We're going to say the probability of rolling a 4 is 1/6. The probability of rolling a 3 is 1/6. So the probability of getting a 7 is going to be 1/6 times 1/6. What is the probability of getting a 4 and a 3? So the probability of rolling a 7 in any one of these combinations is 1/6. But we can roll the 7 6 different ways. So this one event, rolling a 7, has 6 possible outcomes. I'm sorry, this should be 6. Sorry, there are 6 ways to roll a 7. All right, so to get the overall, to account for all of those outcomes, we need to use the sum rule. So we are going to add the probability of each of these events together to get the overall probability of rolling a 7 in any way, which is equal to 1/6. So the chance that you are going to throw 2 dice and get a 7 by any one of these possible combinations is a 1 in 6 chance. So let's use let's do an example using the sum rule. So what is the probability of one family having 2 daughters and a son? So we did this example, or a similar example, with the product rule, where we asked, what is the probability of having daughter, son, daughter, in that order? And we use the product rule because we want to know, how do we have a daughter and a son and a daughter in a very specific way? There's only one outcome. The only way you can have a daughter, son, daughter is to have daughter, son, daughter. But what if we want to find out, how do we have 2 daughters and a son? What's the probability of having 2 daughters and a son? And it doesn't matter what order they're in. Well, there are 3 outcomes, 3 possible outcomes. We can have 2 daughters and then a son, daughter, son, daughter, or a son and then 2 daughters. So one event can occur through 3 different outcomes. So the sum rule tells us that we can add together all of those independent events. So the chance that we are going to have daughter, son, daughter is 1/2 chance, daughter, daughter, son, is 1/2 chance to have a daughter, and then a 1/2 chance to have another daughter, and then a 1/2 chance to have a son, which is equal to 1/8. Daughter, son, daughter, we already calculated. That was also 1/8. 1/2 chance having a daughter, 1/2 chance of having a son, 1/2 chance of having another daughter, also 1/8. Same thing with a son. 1/2 chance we'll have a son, 1/2 for daughter, 1/2 for daughter again, 1/8. So we can get 2 daughters and a son in 3 different ways. Now let's apply the sum rule. So the sum rule says we can add the chance of each independent event. So we add our fractions. This is equal to 3/8. So there's a 3 and 8 chance that this family will have 2 daughters and 1 son in any order. So let's look at one other way that we can think about these probability problems. So what is the probability that at least one of 3 coins will not be a heads? So this is sort of a backwards. This is the other way you can say this is what's the probability that you'll get at least 1 tails? So the probability of flipping 3 heads is 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. So the probability of not flipping that combination is 1 minus 1/8 or 1/7/8. So sometimes it's easier to calculate the probability of something not happening than calculating all of the possible ways that it can happen. And that you'll just have to evaluate based on the problem. And really, I probably won't ask one quite this complicated. That doesn't mean that I won't or it won't pop up in your homework, but just keep in mind that sometimes it's easier, there's less calculations if you do the opposite of what the problem is asking you.